Super. So we are live, and I am joined by Sparrow. Hi, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm good. I'm good. We've got a
Amazing.
sunny day, as you can see from my window.
And we have another cat, which is a guest of honor. I feel today is like a full on cat day with all the guests in the live stream, which is amazing.
Yeah, I
Um,
think she's rather camera shy, so she's right there, but I don't know that she'll come on camera.
so obviously, I've just had a conversation with Colburn, who talked a little bit about his vision behind like Museum of Crypto Art and everything he wants to try to, accomplish and bring forward. So I guess I'd start with the same, I think, with the same question that I've asked him at the start, which is when did this journey into crypto art start for you? And talk a little bit about, the history that has brought you so far.
Yeah. So I was a painter, right? I did physical artworks. Um, and it was encaustic wax paintings that I really love. And I mean, some of the oldest paintings in existence are encaustic wax. So they last for centuries, right? These paintings have been there since 2 BC, right? I mean, so I was looking for a way to marry the longevity of the artworks I was creating with permanent provenance data. And that's how I discovered or came across blockchain as a way for recording history, for the provenance of artworks, in both an immutable and in a public way. My first foray into that was on a private blockchain, and that really didn't work out well. So what got completely sold on the idea of a public ledger, and having that data be freely available to anybody who wants to look it up. And I think that's a really powerful idea for artists. People spend, ArtGnome will tell you, hours and hours, lifetimes sometimes, researching artists' body of work to identify which works are theirs and when they were created, and all of that rich information is really costly to maintain. But if it's recorded by the artists themselves on a public ledger, there's no further cost involved. Putting together a raison d'etre, right, a catalog raison, will be simple and quick because it's all of the records are there.
And when did it start? Like, how long ago was this?
Yeah, so that was like 2018 was when I started asking the questions and started doing experiments. It wasn't until 2019 that I eventually ended up with Ethereum.
That's really interesting. I've never, in like the interviews that I've done and the conversations that I've done, I've never heard somebody like approach this from, obviously, everybody wants it to be like within the blockchain, but I've actually never seen it in the way that you're describing it now, that it's actually, like documenting the body of work for purpose of research as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and that's really, really interesting. So have you kind of, built on that, like within, the time that you've like essentially tokenized your works?
It's always in the back of my mind, right? So all of the it's why I've been so interested and have done the research about file storage, about metadata and its, longevity. So in the back of my mind, as I've been tokenizing myself, it's always in the back of my mind about how long is this going to last? What records am I leaving behind? And probably the thing that most people don't know, I'm sure I've mentioned it, but it doesn't seem to seep into people's awareness. I didn't do digital art until I discovered blockchain. So the record of the things that I have tokenized is a record of my development as a digital artist, which I think is also really interesting and will be interesting to look back on. I can go back to the first things that I ever did, like a certificate of originality on, and go, oh my God, what was I doing?
And how has, your, obviously you don't, as you mentioned, like you don't come from like a digital art background, let's say. So this has been like a completely new learning for you. And I guess also a body of work, I imagine. So how has this process been? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, digital is really interesting. I don't think I'll ever completely move to digital only, because I like the physicality of, particularly encaustic wax, right? It does things to all of your senses as you are painting. And it's just a lovely medium to work in. But it's also raises the barrier to actually having a regular practice. So I have a full-time job that I work at during the day. And so the time that I have for art is compressed into evenings and weekends and around all of the other things that I do. The setup for painting and then the cleanup after painting means you need a big block of time to do that. And so what I found with digital work is that you can fit that in 15, 20 minutes, and then you just save the file and you can pick that file back up at any point in any, at any time and just begin again where you left off. And that ease of moving back and forth between life and art has been really, really appealing. And I hope that you can kind of see that in the digital work that I've done, because it is more expressive of my day-to-day life than my paintings are. My paintings are planned ahead of time, and sort of things that I want to achieve are planned ahead of time. Whereas with the digital art, because I'm doing it in between my other daily activities, my daily life creeps in, it seeps in, and it moves it in other directions.
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting way of seeing it. And I want to go back to when you say, like, with paintings, you kind of plan it. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, do you start the painting already with a sort of like an idea of what you would like it to be, or to what you would like the end painting to look like?
Never with. I don't have a picture in my head when I start. I have certain things that I want to explore. I guess that's what I mean by planning. It's like, well, I'll be thinking, oh, I wonder what would happen if I did this. And so the next time I approach the painting, I go in that direction. Or I'll do a series of paintings testing a new technique that I learned, and trying that out in different. So that's my plan. really is working with the medium to see what happens. And in some ways, my early digital art is exactly that. It was, okay, what can I do with this tool? And that's a carryover from my physical art.
And going back to, some of your like early pieces. So for example, like one of the pieces which I think is also, well, it's in Colburn's collection. I'm going to share my screen so we have it up. Is this one here, which is The Girl with No Shadow, which I'm guessing is one of your early pieces. Am I correct in saying this?
That was just last year, so not that early, no.
And with this, like, do you want to maybe like, dive a little bit deeper into the process of this? Like, where does it stand between, your approach to like coming from painting to digital art, and maybe this is like, a transition into actually like having more experience with the medium of digital art?
Yeah, so the first ones, really, when I was playing with digital, were all still images because I didn't know animation. So this is sort of a next stage of my development. And I've been playing with and really getting into understanding the generated AI GAN images, and fascinated by that. And I'd started back at the beginning of 2020 exploring these figures and seeing how people responded to them, because to me it's fascinating how our minds fill in the blanks of anything that's remotely human shaped. We make it into we personify it. And so getting these kinds of images from a GAN model were really fascinating because they're just lines the GAN's just coloring pixels. It's us that make this into a figure, a human figure. And this one particularly, so, the title, and this might tie some of the image together. The title, The Girl with No Shadow, is the US title of a book that I had just finished reading. The UK title of that was called The Lollipop Shoes, and it's a sequel to the book that was made into the movie Chocolat by Joanne Harris. And so that's why the lollipop is there. But so there's this image that I get from the GAN, and the sky background is a photo that I took from my phone, and there's other sort of collage elements that all then get brought together to make this image, which the way the figure is standing suggested the quote from that book, right? It was something that just married up in my mind, and I was like, yes, that's what it is.
And you just mentioned, our minds kind of go to automatically like picture, the human side to the figure. And actually, like, that was my, the first feeling when I saw this was to like figure out where the face was, right? Because, the face is you can't really, there's no like features. So yeah, like, the conscious decision, I guess, of not having like features of the face was why is that? And yeah.
So there's a practical reason for that, and then there is the artistic reason for that. the practical reason is that GAN generated images are really bad at generating faces. I mean, some GANs are really good at it, but not the models that I'm using. The models that I'm using come out with these really horrific, distorted faces. And I found those to be really distracting to all of the other elements, right, in the artwork. So it was a choice to just, okay, let's just bypass that. But the other side of it is most of the figures that I've done are obviously women, and there is this not seeing of women in society in general. And so the facelessness is really something that a lot of women, I think, can actually feel when they're out in society. You know, I'm just not being seen as a person. I'm being, you know, seen as something different. I'm something other. And I think that the facelessness fits with that as well.
That's interesting. And I guess, you know, it kind of like sparked another comment or a question with it, which is that the figure has no face, well, no features, but at the same time, it kind of occupies a whole space of visually, right? So it's bigger, like it's taller than the sky almost, like it's as, you know, it kind of occupies the full image. So is that,
and it's looking down on you, right? Which is one of the things that really connected it, her stance, and the fact that the perspective is from below, really connected with that quote from the book. I mean, it is just, there's no such thing as magic. It is all about the way you carry yourself, and it's your attitude. And, you know, just fuck off, I'm fabulous.
I love that, because it is pretty visible, especially now that you've said, you know, you kind of almost like took out all of the human kind of features and left the figure to just have that impact in a way, which is, it's just a figure. Like, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It's a woman, of course, and it's there in front of your face.
Yes, I think adding detail to that, or having, you know, in some of the other works, there are nice subtle colors and things like that, but this really needed to be strong and almost opaque, right? Mm-hmm. So it had to be a single color so that it was imposing.
Interesting. And I guess, you know, going back to kind of the start of the conversation where you said that, you know, you've learned like a new way, you know, a new medium, which is like digital art. I'm interested to understand, how are you playing, or if you are playing like with the two mediums, so with like painting and like digital art, have you combined the two, or are you still seeing them as two separate kind of mediums?
I haven't attempted really to try and combine the two, because they serve two different purposes for me, really. And they have very different feelings to them. So I know that it would probably be interesting to take maybe close-ups or pieces of physical work and transform that into, I don't know, something that is manipulated in the digital world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's been done quite a lot, and I'm more interested in pushing And you'll see, so the latest works on Super Rare are the next step for me in pushing beyond figures or recognizable figures and into sort of these more ambiguous, almost creatures in some respects. So there still are recognizable figures, but in that second row, we're sort of going into not male, not female, not even human, but a bit beyond, and kind of exploring, okay, so how far can we push this to figure out where we lose that this is a human-like figure and it's now something else again.
That's really interesting. And actually, what I'm also noticing is that, almost all of these pieces, like the girl with no shadow, have again like no kind of like human features within the face. So it's a figure, as you said, but you don't know if it's a man or a woman or a human being at all. It could potentially even be some other form of life, let's say.
Yes, for sure.
That's really interesting. But actually, I'm seeing, also here, like there are some kind of like reminds you of paintings, like it kind of like feels like it's almost, painted. So I guess, in a way, like there is that part of, your other medium that kind of comes into play. Right?
Yeah. So there are visual cues, right? And doing GAN work, a lot of it is about selection of images, because you generate thousands of these images, and then really what you need to do is train your eye on composition, which is something that you learn when you do physical pieces, right? You have to block out the different sections and, have that composition of relational elements in mind when you're doing things. And so going through the thousands of images that GANs generate, you need to always be cognizant of the blocking and the composition. And when you get one that has been generated with a pleasing composition, you kind of jump up and down for joy, because there's nothing that's, making that happen. It is just completely, nearly random.
And how has your way of approaching digital art kind of changed from, if we look back from, the very start of 2018 and your first kind of tokenized pieces up until now and today? Like how have you developed into this medium, and also I guess into the ecosystem as well, if we can tie it?
Yeah. So I mean, the first ones, the very first ones, were literally just photo manipulations. So, in some respects, I've incorporated some of that into these collages, because they still incorporate some of my, pictures that I've taken with my phone. But there was a lot more manipulation of the images and working with glitches. And I love fractals. So, I've got a little app that will, take an image as input and output some fractals, and then I manipulate those fractals. So it really was, at the very beginning, just exploring all of the tools. And I quickly came across the AI generated images. And I played with them a little bit and thought, God, this is a lot of really hard work. And so I went back to the, digital photo manipulation and fractals and glitches. But there was that potential there in the AI generated stuff that I kept going back to it And when Async launched was when I really started seriously looking at it, because one of the pieces that I did for the First Supper was the Art Bread storybook. So it was just a series of images that were figures that told a kind of story over time. And that's just one layer, and you can change the images of that layer. And it was while I was trying to get all of those images the way that I wanted them, so just running that model over and over again, that I got something slightly different. And at the time I'm like, I can't use that because it doesn't fit with what I want. But I kept going back to it. And the one that I kept going back to actually became like the checkpoint one for the rest that have come since then.
Just pulling up your async profile as well. Which is the First Supper, which is this. I actually had an interview with a lot of money last week, and he spoke about the First Supper, and it's really interesting because it was one of those, like, the first real big collaboration between between all of you, and who I guess the OG kind of crypto artists really in the space. So it's super interesting to go back to that time and like really look at how that collaboration like happened, and everybody really like adding their bits and pieces. Like I told him as well, like it's so weird because there's so many artists, but at the same time it feels like it fits perfectly, that it just happens to be as if it was made, it seems like made by one person, whilst actually it's made by almost 10 artists, I think, which is
12 or 13. Yeah, 13.
Which is insane. And I guess like going back to this, like how even like thinking about, for example, like async art, and how has managed to, I guess, even expand your knowledge of like digital art and like work with that medium as well. How has that how has that experience been?
So async, I think for me, changed everything, simply because of what you could do with it that you can't do. So async is the thing that made blockchain make more sense as a way to deliver art, rather than it just being a provenance mechanism, which it was for me prior to that. Async made it be, the fact that it requires the smart contract and it requires the tokens for the art to be what you intend it to be, makes it integral to these pieces of art. And that changed everything. It changed the way that I saw the potential for NFTs and for blockchain.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I completely agree. For sure, it's really like built for the medium. It is. It's kind of like really like art on the blockchain. If you think about it.
Yeah, I mean it takes advantage of the underlying technology in a way. So there are other things that take advantage of the fact that the artworks are tokens, but so far all of the other applications of that are financial. So the fractalization of the art, and being able to make financial instruments like a pool of NFTs, and then you get an ERC20 that represents that pool. This is the only thing that allows artists an expressive capacity with the tokens. Promising, although I think it's still undeveloped, but it should also encourage artistic expression is the D-Canvas. If you've seen that application, where you purchase a bit of the canvas and then you can build up this big picture. So that's another use of tokenizing, in the way that like Eve Sussman did 89 Seconds Atomized, right? Where each bit of the movie is tokenized, and so you can turn it off and on. The D-Canvas stuff will be really amazing to see if people collaborate and make something amazing that requires cooperation and coordination, or if everybody just goes and does their own individual thing and the result is chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the beauties of async and the platform is that kind of brings in collaborations, with the fact that like you can play with layers and everybody can work on their own part in a way, like independently. It does allow for a lot of these collaborations to actually happen. Like even like looking at your profile here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 collaborations, which is
and just one individual work.
Yeah, which is amazing actually, because it's also part of the beauty of the ecosystem that we are in. Like Cryptoart is collaborations.
Yes, and I think that's something that has not really happened in art movements before. The traditional art world is really set up to revolve around competition, and so on top of the physical barriers to collaborating between artists, there's the mental barriers to collaborations, and it's so refreshing to see that hasn't existed in the community. People are really happy to collaborate, knowing that with the underlying technology, again, it's easy to attribute the artists, and the payments, you don't have to worry about it's going to go to one person and then need to be split out. It can just happen automatically, and royalties can happen automatically. It enables that kind of collaborative environment, which is amazing.
Absolutely. And I guess going back to a little bit, what has been your time here in with Cryptoart and how the space has evolved. You're part of a lot of different groups or institutions. So MOCA, is one of them. Dada is another. Yeah, I'd love to kind of like hear your thoughts around also like linking it back to what we were saying with Colburn and like his vision for the museum. What do you see as being like important to really like ground down in the space now, and how you see it evolving in your eyes and in the future?
Yeah, so for me, Cryptoart Cryptoart is the community. It's this community of artists and whatever they determine it to be. So whatever they're doing, that's Cryptoart. That's my definition. And that encompasses such a broad range, with underlying principles and underlying philosophy. Otherwise, those particular artists wouldn't be here. And I think that's what's important to preserve. It is the fact that the existing system didn't work for these artists. And so they built all of this along with the platforms, along with the early collectors, right? Because it wasn't one single group on their own. It was everybody doing this together. And so when I say, crypto art, I include the people developing the platforms, I include the collectors, and obviously including the artists. But I do believe quite strongly that because artists are always imagining what doesn't exist and making it exist, right? That's what you do when you create art. You have this thing in your head and you make it, something tangible, something that everyone can see. I think it is artists who most easily imagine different ways of doing things. And so seeing this old system that didn't work and people couldn't fit into, or the people who were here didn't really fit into, and creating something that they could fit into and be a part of, is what made crypto art what it was. And it's that spirit that I'm hoping gets captured in the Museum of Crypto Art. That spirit of, we're doing this ourselves. And so all of the collaboration that Colborne's talking about, the participation, all of that is, okay, we don't need someone from outside to validate this or do this for us. We can do this ourselves. And we will do this ourselves. And I think that's really.
And you have done it, really, like it has
We
been
have been doing it. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If something doesn't exist, you create it, right?
Yeah. That's your definition of crypto art is, I like that. It's because it is really everybody, it's everybody who made it.
Yes.
That is the definition of crypto art. Do you think
that makes it different to a lot of the other art movements who were, we're privileged in some way, right? Because a lot of the other art movements throughout history were just artists in one isolated area on their own, doing their own thing and being completely misunderstood by everyone, right? Galleries, collectors, like literally everyone. And here we are, artists, being misunderstood mostly by lots of people, but we're privileged that we have developers and collectors who understand what we're talking about and what we're doing. And together we can actually make this, something really historically important, I think.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and it kind of really brings up some important values of like community, and like really having those connections between like collectors, between the platforms, and between the artists, as like being a whole, really.
Yes.
And not, as you said, with the traditional art world, there's you kind of work in silo, right? So you're on your own and you work on your own thing, probably with being represented with a gallery or an auction house, and that's kind of like how it follows. But with this, it's I guess it's more like well-rounded in a way. I like, do you think those aspects of competition are coming up or have come up now that the space has grown and evolved, or do you think there's still those grounds basis thoughts are still there?
I think they're still there. I mean, because many of the original artists obviously are still here. Um, I don't know how much that comes across to
Mhm.
new artists entering. I mean, that's why we need, I think, groups and institutions that can communicate those values to people entering. Um, and it's not like, it's an indoctrination. It is just, this is how this was built, and what you see was achieved because of those values. If we had had that competition from the beginning, we wouldn't be here where we are today, right? We would not have been able to, be even talking about mainstream adoption. Um, it really requires that coordination and that collaboration between all of the parties, right? So, we looked at the artist collaborations, but
Yeah.
the significant thing about the First Supper really was it was more than a collaboration between just the artists. It was a collaboration between the artists and the platform, right? It was Conlon in his, vision going, okay, well, I don't really know what artists want, so let's get them in here and let's see. And so the discussions there about, well, we should be able to do this, and a day or two later would then be able to do that. And that's just really mind-blowing. And I don't know of a parallel um, with that in any art history, really. I'm sure someone will point one out, and I'm happy. Please, tag me on Twitter and tell me of a partnership like that where the technology to do things was worked out with, a group of artists to allow them to express themselves in the way that they wanted. I'd love to know of a historical parallel to that.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting thought because it's like, and to be honest, like it is something that I've actually never thought about, and I'm actually thinking now that it's really, a collaboration between, yeah, the platforms as well, because a lot of the time, we point the finger at the platforms saying like, no, they should be doing this, they should be that, but actually they are also really working on like a bottom up approach, so really like taking in, especially, I'm looking at, async or super rare or known origin, the platforms that have been around for a long time, taking in, what the artists are saying, we would like this and we would like that, and kind of like integrating that into, the technology. Usually it's, the other way around, like humans kind of adapt to the innovation of technology, right? Like
Yes.
if you think about, the internet or, Instagram or Twitter, like all of the yeah, the kind of the big revolutions in a way. So that's really interesting to see that way.
Yeah, and it's the thing that has made this what it was, I think. If someone had come up with, an Instagram of crypto art and said, "Here, this is the way you do crypto art," it would have never gone anywhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a lot of food for thought. So thank you for that, because it was a it's really interesting what you said. Amazing. Well, I think it was great to chat. Um,
It's been lovely being here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your thoughts, and yeah, for to be honest, like to help me see a couple of new aspects of crypto art as well. I think it's always brilliant to hear these stories.
Well, I'm so happy. I love chatting to you. You're absolutely wonderful. And I'm so go beyond just the platforms, the collectors, and the artists, and the people reporting on this movement, on this space, are also key, right? And so you bring them into the whole narrative, and you begin collaborating as well in telling the story, and just as much a part of everything as anyone else. So thank you
Yeah,
for doing that.
no, that's it's something that we like, even with Colburn and like Fanny and Jason, all of the people that have kind of really been documenting, even the early stages, like to bring up the stories that have built the community so far. And as you said, the values that were so like engrounded into what is this community. So yeah, definitely, 100% agree.
And now we'll have a place to preserve them.
Exactly.
Museum of Cryptoart.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the chat. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.
Bye.